What's up, guys? This is part 3 of my video, and here I'm going to be challenging IP's claim that the ages shouldn't be interpreted literally, and also I want to challenge Hugh Ross's claim that there are gaps in Genesis 5 and 11. I decided to skip his video on the serpent and on the fall because I either agreed with him on it or I thought I covered it in the previous videos. So with no further ado,
culture in mind. But what does the biblical and cultural context suggest?
the overwhelming evidence is that Jews and Christians took the dates to be literally. Josephus here records from the creation to the death of Isaac, he records 3,833 years. And when we look at other spots that he references, he makes no distinction between the dates given us into the genealogies with actual historical events that everyone agrees on that happened during these time periods. I'll put it on the line here and say that there is no early Jewish or Christian source you can find that has ever thought the genealogies as not to be literal accounts. And we know this because if he was, he would have put them in his video. But you watch it, he put 0 sources in there, because there was none.
Ages in Genesis 5 have become a stumbling block for many, mainly because it seems astronomically impossible.
Okay, so of all the things you can question in the Bible, magicians turning pieces of wood into snakes, women being able to summon people and talk to the dead, people claiming to be demonically possessed, the most controversial thing you're thinking is in there is the dates in Genesis. This seems like the most reasonable to me. And I think this reveals the real reason why he's holding to this interpretation of the text. It's because he's an evolutionist and he wants to kind of squeeze evolution into the Bible. One way we could explain it scientifically is looking at the mutation accumulation and the genetic entropy of the genome. Nearly all non-neutral mutations are deleterious. We inherit a multitude of old mutations and we pass them on to our kids. So if Adam and Eve were made perfect with a lot of less genetic mistakes, they could, in theory, be able to live for very long periods of time. Of course, this would be a very big problem for the evolutionists because they have it from starting from the muck and working up into the stars, where genetic entropy would suggest the opposite. Also, every time the cell divides during mitosis, the telomeres tend to shorten a little bit, and this is why we think this causes aging. And we do have some ways we can actually lengthen the telomeres. For example, we can use the telomerase enzyme to cause the telomeres to lengthen. The problem with doing this, though, is they've discovered with some experiments that just increased the cancer rate in mice that they did this to. So that would suggest that we do want the telomeres to shorten and prevent the cells from dying, to prevent against cancers and other diseases showing up. And with what we understand about genetics, we've only been able to sequence the human genome like 20, 30 years ago, really. We don't have a very good sense of knowledge yet. So just saying, hey, we don't know everything is perfectly an acceptable result. And it's no way to try and bend a text to fit current mainstream narrative.
That anyone could live past the age of 900, let alone the age of 200. Especially because similar texts from that time period record the average age was around 70 to 80. At the city of Emmer, it records, 120 years are the years of mankind. Verily it is their bane. At Emmer, it most likely is an ideal number for mankind, since another text from that city says the average age was 70 to 80.
Okay, so he cites Psalm 90, but Psalm 90 is during the time after the Exodus, so it's nowhere near the age of the patriarchs, and it doesn't work for the cultural context. And still in this passage, although Moses lives to 120, the people of Israel at that time, they were living around 70 to 80 years old, much like today. And if we look at the Emmer texts, well, the Emmer texts were written from 14th century BC to about the 11th century BC, meaning, and with them it actually confirms this, that people lived on average from 70 to 80 years, and the absolute maximum was 120. So considering the historical context of Emmer, this would actually confirm the dates given to us in the Bible for that time period, as opposed to refute them.
Which is an interesting parallel to biblical passages.
Genesis 6:3 is not a problem for us because it's talking about the number of years left until the flood is going to occur.
Even in our own culture, are not always meant to be taken literally. Karen Ray Nimitnijit says, the Mesopotamians assigned numerical value to each sign. Thus every name had a corresponding numerical value. And evidence from the ancient Near East seems to suggest the symbolic usage of numbers was used even more. For example, during the construction of his palace, Sargon II said, I built the circumference of the city wall, 16,283 cubits, the number of my name. You are in free...
I wonder how big these city walls are. Oh well, I guess we can't tell by looking at the passage. Yes, they used gematria. They thought of these numbers in symbolic terms, and if you go through the Bible, you'll see there's tons of numbers they're using that they thought had symbolic meanings. But this does not mean that they didn't think of these numbers as having a literal meaning and having a literal age. So when it says Adam lived 130 years and begot Seth, there is no precedent for anyone taking this non-literally, and you have not provided any proof otherwise.
Likewise, even in our own culture, we can use numbers symbolically without literal numerical meaning. What if I told you my wife is a 10? Is anyone going to accuse me of marrying a child?
If you said my wife is 10 years old, yes, that would be the most legitimate translation of this. And likewise, when Adam says, or in Genesis when it says Adam lived 130 years and then begot Seth, yes, that is the most legitimate translation.
Authors readily use and play with numbers for symbolic means. The most obvious is in the genealogy that's found in the Gospel of Matthew, where he specifically leaves out and duplicates generations in order to get 3 perfect sets of 14, totaling 42 generations from Abraham to Christ. No one can be true to the text and assume Matthew is being literal. It is clear when you read the genealogies and chronicles. This is not recognized.
Okay, so first off, we'll deal with the first of these examples. The Salmon-Boaz example comes from Ruth, but the problem with using this is the authors of the Gospel had no access to the actual genealogy, so it's wrong to fault them for using this. And this isn't a contradiction for us, because begot in the Greek and Hebrew can mean multiple generations away, and the author of Ruth was probably just not wanting to add a whole bunch of useless generations into the mix. As for the missing 3 names, Hilary had a good explanation for this. Well, Joram married the daughter of an Arab, the daughter of, or Ahab, and we learn later her name was Athaliah. Now scripture tells us that Ahab's line was cut off from reigning for 4 generations, and Jeshu's sons would instead rule over Israel. It turns out that the offspring of Ahab would also not reign in Judah. If Athaliah represents the first generation of Ahab, then the next 3 offspring of hers would be Uzziah, Joshua, and Amaziah. Amaziah would have been the 4th generation. These are the exact 3 people that Matthew omitted from his genealogy. Hilary explains this quite clearly. So, by skipping 3 names, Matthew ingeniously signals the royal birth of Jesus before generations of the evil Ahab find no mention. Okay, the third example he brings up is Jeconiah. But there's actually two Jeconiahs if you look into this. One who's written Jeremiah, who's cursed, whose seed will never sit on the throne of David. He was the son of Jehoiakim. But there is actually another Jeconiah who was the direct son of Josiah. And if we look at his genealogy, so he was Johanna, and he changed his name to Jeconiah, we believe. If you look at Chronicles versus Matthew, you can see proof of this above. It's kind of annoying because there's a lot of names that are similar, especially around the same time, but we know there's actually two different Zerubbabels here because they have different fathers and different sons. And if he says is right, then and it is the Jeconiah who's cursed, then it automatically makes Jesus a false Messiah. So good job, man. I'll post a link in the description to a video where a guy explains this actually much better than I can.
Israel's patriarchs were actually ideal numbers and not their literal ages. Kenneth Kitchen notes the odd age of Joseph and Joshua, who both have strong affinity with Egypt. Both men are said to have lived to the age of 110.
This is just cherry picking the data to find which numbers fit with your theory and ignoring all the dozens upon dozens of numbers that don't fit with your theory and no one can figure out a numerological meaning for.
Now, also notes the ages from Abraham to Jacob show a mathematical formula ending in Jacob's whole life and from the time he was named Israel. This is not an opinion, it is math. Coincidences like this do not occur. Abraham is given 75 years in his father's house and 75 years with his son. He was 100 when his son was born and lived in Canaan 100 years. Jacob lived 17 years with Joseph and then another 17 years with him in Egypt.
Okay, so I would agree something interesting is going on here, but based on the normalness of these dates, either A, the biblical authors are lying, or B, something else is going on here. Something more interesting. I mean, come on, think about it. This is God here. And we see, like in the book of Esther and in Joseph's life, that it's clear that God is playing a role in working and influencing things in there. So why couldn't he not influence the authors or influence the dates?
Genesis 25 says Abraham breathed his last and died in a good old age, an old man and full of years, and was gathered to his people. The text also records elsewhere Abraham lived to be 175. But this wouldn't make sense with his ancestry. Abraham would have died young by the standard of those who came before him. In fact, his ancestor Eber would have outlived him. Abraham's death would have been a travesty.
This is a great argument to say that the Septuagint is the correct dates and the Hebrew Masoretic is wrong. Because in the Septuagint, Noah and Shem, they died out 1,000 years and 800 years away. So these contradictions don't exist. I'm going to argue this in part 3. So this is going to be it for now because my video is getting a little bit big. I'm going to deal with the rest of his part on the genealogies in that video. For now, like, comment, subscribe, and thanks for watching. Have a nice day.